And the worst people to ask about what should I do with my estate is your children.
The gloves are off, which interestingly enough happens oftentimes between siblings on estate issues after mom and dad are gone. And in our show today, we're going to take the gloves off and we're going to get kind of gritty in a discussion with attorney Rick Durfee of Durfee Law Group about estate planning.
Kids will play mom and dad against each other, which is the root of family conflict. If mom and dad are conflicted while they're alive, guess what? The kids are going to be even more conflicted when mom and dad are not here to be the peacemakers anymore.
Plus, the danger of relying only on a will as an estate management tool.
Wills are a guarantee that there will be litigation. There will be conflict.
We'll also discuss some of the tools that can be used in good, proactive estate management and the dangers of kicking this can down the road.
Procrastination is your enemy. It is going to hurt you. It's going to cost you money, real money, and it's going to hurt your family.
This is not one of these warm, fuzzy shows today, but if you value the legacy you'd like to leave behind to your family, listen in on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, your host. Thanks for joining us on our program here today. We're going to get into the meat of the show here in just a moment, but it is a show here today that I'm just telling you, and I've said this before on other shows, and I hate to just keep beating the drum on this, but this is a show, if you hear it on the radio, you're going to want to go to our podcast site or any podcast provider and be able to have that opportunity to listen to it, stop, rewind, listen to it again, because there's going to be things that we talk about here today that you're just going to want to hear that, make sure, did I hear that right, or how did he say that? Because we got a lot to cover regarding estate planning, how we can effectively do that in a way so that we can really try to eliminate some of the family dynamics that come into play oftentimes that either keeps estate planning from happening or just is not done in the most correct manner. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We'll have that interview here in just a few minutes. I did want to let you know that if you hear something, maybe a question you might have in a show, comments, concerns, or an idea for a show, please feel free to send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. And also, if you're listening to a show and you like it or you have a comment about it, please leave those comments. It's helpful not only for us, but it's also helpful for other people that listen to the podcast or browsing through and they see remarks or a rating on a show that helps them to say, hey, maybe this is something I need to go and listen to. And I've said it many times, a lot of the shows that we do here are shows that you can listen to at pretty much any time of the year and find some relevance in that. So please feel free to check us out on any podcast provider or going to workingranchladio.com as well. Now, a moment ago, I talked about sending me an email. I just got to let you know, I'm kind of out of the studio a little bit more this time of the year because we're in the thick of things calving here on the X-Ring Ranch in northeastern Wyoming. And with May calving, we and about 80% of these set to calve in the first cycle. Things have been quite busy. We got most of the heifers wrapped up, but now the cows are really going, and we've been blessed and fortunate enough to get some good moisture here, so we are staying plenty busy here on the X-Ring Ranch. Well, as we turn now, I want to introduce to you our guest joining us here on our program today, Rick Durfee with Durfee Law Group. And Rick, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
You bet. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we've covered estate issues from time to time here on our program, and I got to tell you, Rick, really fundamentally for me, I feel that estate issues are one of, if not one of the biggest issues that I think can affect the ability for our ranching families to continue on, to continue that heritage or that legacy, wherever we want to call that. And when we talk about sustainability in the ranching industry, of course, that's a buzzword when we talk about from environmental standpoints, but really from the standpoint of keeping that business moving on to the next generation, that's a sustainable picture as well. And I really feel, and as you know, in your guys' business too, you deal with this a lot. This is one of the reasons that family ranches don't get passed on, and we see that sustainability just stop. That's just a closed door. That's what you guys see as well, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah. This is a make or break it deal. It's either going to kill the family's involvement in the ranch or it's going to go on. And what planning is done and how it's implemented and what vision is put into effect makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. When somebody first approaches you as a family ranch, what are some of the first things that you try to identify and bring out so that helps you in providing some direction for them?
Well, I appreciate that question. There's a couple of things. There's the boring but necessary information. We need to know what are we dealing with here? What is the ranch or the farming operation? What is the land? What is the equipment? What are you doing with it? What is your revenue? And all of those kind of facts and figures are essential. And then we also need to know facts about the family. Who are the players here? And what is their involvement? What are their roles? But then beyond that is what matters to you. What are you concerned about? Often people, when they finally drag themselves into the lawyer's office, it's like they don't go to the dentist until they have a toothache. There's usually some pain point. So what is it that motivated you to finally address this issue? And it might be, well, grandma died and her situation was just catastrophic. The family blew apart and brothers and sisters hate each other and won't talk to each other. We want to not have that. Or we're having to sell the farm because we don't have liquidity to pay the taxes or whatever. So often there's going to be that pain point, and that will be our segue, our entry into the broader dialogue of, okay, now let's come up with a plan, not only to address that immediate pain point, but also the long-term things that you may not be thinking about because you haven't been working in this space that we as lawyers that help families through these issues work in.
Mm-hmm. You talk about the pain point, and I read a book several years ago. I think it was A Purpose-Driven Life. And at the very beginning of it, I remember it said people are motivated by two things, pain or pleasure. And as you said there, pain typically has that method of doing that and not wanting to deal with that. Let's get into one of those points, and no doubt it's an issue that we deal with, and that is, just in terms of with parents, the kids that are a part of that whole process. And as you began to unveil that, and you guys are trying to figure out the direction you're going to handle a particular situation, how do you address the situation with kids and members of the family? I guess just walk us through some of that and figuring out how that has to happen.
There's no two families that are the same. And with the next generation, we see a great variety of things. For example, sometimes the family members that are not involved in the farming or ranching operation, they've moved to the big city, they're professionals, they have their own money, they're not interested in, not concerned about, and they really don't care. And they go, yeah, we'll be all right, mom and dad. We don't need that. And then there's others that do need it and that are envious of the ones that stayed on the farm and are concerned, I have to get my piece of the pie or I'm going to be in trouble. I can't retire or I can't pay for my medical care in retirement or whatever. And then, of course, there's the ones who have loyally stayed on the farm and driven a tractor for decades and feel like the value of the farm is to some degree a function of their labor and their energy. And they feel like, well, it's not fair for others to benefit by what I've been building and working on. So we have to uncover that dynamic and we have to figure out what's going on in this particular family and then address that. And then also mom and dad sometimes have very different opinions between each other. One will say, well, no, Junior's been riding on the tractor. He gets the farm. And mom will say, well, but that's not fair. I want my daughter who married a rich dentist and lives in the big city to get her fair share. And all of those dynamics go on. And of course, other things like, what if there is nobody in the family that wants to be on the farm? They've all moved away. And we're now dealing with age-related, sooner or later, mom and dad, even though they love the farm, are not going to be able to work it. What are we going to do with that? And all of those economics pile into the picture. So we have to identify, where are we at today? What are the issues that we're working? What are the pain points we've talked about? And then we can devise a plan based on that.
Yeah. So how do we, and as you said, no two families are the same, and we understand that, but how do we get to some sort of a consensus? Because that's, other than just sell the place, that's probably the easiest.
Yeah, I find it interesting you use the word consensus. And I know that the impulse is for mom and dad, we want our family members to agree with and go along with whatever our plan is. And candidly, this is an issue that everybody doing any kind of estate planning confronts. And the worst people to ask about what should I do with my estate is your children. Don't ask them. It's their opinion is going to be a bad one in any event. And I want to give you a specific example.
Okay.
If you ask the kids, wait, do you want me to just give you all this money or wealth now and you can do with it as you please? Or would you like the wealth to come to you in a protected fashion so that it's not available to your creditors or your liabilities, and it's protected from even things like if you have a substance abuse problem or you're in a bad marriage or you've made some bad business decisions, the property is protected from all that. Oh, by the way, that means that you can't just spend it on whatever you want. Now, if you ask the kids that every time, they're going to say, Mom and Dad, shut up, give me the money, get out of my way. I know what to do with it. I don't need your protection. That's demeaning and insulting. I can spend the money just fine. And the ones who want the money the most are the least qualified to handle it. So I think that Mom and Dad need to, as the parents, be the grown-ups in the room and devise a plan that's going to work. And then, okay, it is good to, in fact, there comes a point where you must bring the next generation into the loop and into that process and get their buy-in and their consensus. But it's not a matter of we're going to take a vote on this. It's not a matter of we're going to collectively design a plan. No, Mom and Dad designed the plan. And there's things we could do to involve the next generation in a very proactive, positive, healthy way that does not upend Mom and Dad's responsibility to be the parents.
Mm-hmm. My guest today is Rick Durfee. He's with the Durfee Law Group. We're going to take a quick break here and come back. We are talking on estate planning and, why do we need an estate plan and how that moves forward. As we continue on in our conversation today, we're going to continue talking about some of the family dynamics in this. Also, just the fact that a lot of ranchers are in a situation where they're land rich and they're cash poor. How do we handle estate planning in that frame of mind? And also, how do we avoid some of the tax issues that could be out there as well? That's more of the conversation that we're going to have coming up here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with the grass-based livestock producer in mind. Find out more by going to the website at k-linena.com. Back after this.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Rick Durfee with the Durfee Law Group. Their main office is out of Mesa, Arizona, but I know they have some satellite offices. Rick, am I correct? We talked about this before we went on air in Pocatello, Idaho, Sun City, West Arizona, and Phoenix, Arizona. Is that correct?
Yes, and we candidly represent clients all around the U.S. We have attorneys licensed in many, many states, and so we help people wherever they may be.
You bet. And we're talking today because this is kind of their specialty on estate planning. And as I said in the first segment, we've talked about this here on the program from time to time. I think it's important because I really feel it's fundamental to getting our family ranches moved on to the next generation in a healthy manner. Not just moved on, but done in the correct way. And we're going to talk more about that here today. Rick, in the last segment, we were really talking some of the family dynamics that come into playing on estate plannings. And as I talked between the break, I had mentioned the fact that you had commented that the mom and dad need to be the adults in the room and take control, take ownership of how that's going to move forward. But something that also caught my ear a little bit in the last segment is you said, well, mom might want this and dad may want this. So how do we get mom and dad or the owners of the estate, maybe it's aunt and uncle, maybe it's granddad and grandma, together on the same page?
Yeah, well, how we do that is a great question. I just want to say, if we don't do that, the kids will play mom and dad against each other, which is the root of family conflict. If mom and dad are conflicted while they're alive, guess what? The kids are going to be even more conflicted when mom and dad are not here to be the peacemakers anymore. So coming to a consensus ultimately involves having those difficult conversations between the owners of the farm. And I kind of want to tie this to how do we involve the next generation in a healthy way? And this specifically comes into effect when there are some family members that are working on the farm that are still involved in the operations and others that are not. And when do we begin to make the transition from one generation to the next? So when do we begin to talk to kids about succession of a farm or ranch property? It's got to be really early on. And when do we begin to integrate them into the operations? Well, they need to be working on it early, but also they need to have ownership. And let me kind of give kind of a basic example with a farming and ranching operation that comes up a lot. Sometimes daddy warbucks and mommy feel like, oh, it's ours. We have to make all the decisions and we have to own it. And they own it. They've been the owners for forever and they're running it. So everything they buy, everything they do in their own name, even though other family members are working on and involved in it. And often it makes sense. Okay, we're going to buy a new piece of equipment in the family. Well, we can ask the question, who should buy that? Should generation one buy that or should the next generation buy that? Often that's a perfect segue into beginning the transition of the farming operation to the next generation. Okay, next generation, you buy the combine, you buy the whatever the piece of big expensive equipment is. You go get the financing for it. It's your responsibility. You maintain it, you pay for it. And oh, by the way, we'll lease it from you. And now suddenly we have revenue sharing, we have equity building in the next generation, and that can be applied on so many levels. I've seen ranching families that go, hey, we're going to acquire our neighbors because they did no planning and they have to sell their farm because they have taxes due. Let's buy that big section that's next to us. Well, who should buy it? And often it's the next generation. It's not mom and dad. And so we can structure the operations over time if we're being deliberate and intentional about what we're doing so that the transition is smooth and conflict-free. So by the way, the family member that married the rich dentist and moved to the big city, they're going to go, well, I can see, yeah, my sibling bought that and is renting that, and that's obviously theirs, so I don't have an issue with them getting that. Yeah. That's kind of an example. And that doesn't happen by accident. It's got to be deliberate. And that's where mom and dad's leadership comes in. And when mom and dad are just, hiding all the cards, well, we can't tell our children how much money we have because we don't want them to suffer from affluenza where the money ruins them or spoils them. And we want to keep all the control because sharing control is spooky and scary and our kids might do something we don't like. All of those issues, we have to address them and confront them and deal with them.
Mm-hmm. So one more comment or one more question in regards to talking about family, and that is this phrase that comes up. You and I talked about it, and you've kind of touched on it a little bit, and I think what you just talked about there sort of addresses how to start down this road to handle it correctly. But we've heard the phrase equal is not fair, fair is not equal. Always that comes up in this kind of a conversation of estate planning. Your thoughts on when I say that phrase?
Sure. So we have to recognize that, in fact, the ones working on the farm or ranch have contributed to its value. That's real. And that's not imaginary. That's not fake. And so there are mechanisms we can employ to accommodate that. We can have a buy-sell arrangement where the ones who are working on it buy out mom and dad for fair market value. And then the family members share equally in mom and dad's estate, whatever that is. That can be funded with life insurance sometimes. That can be funded with the operational income. We can do things like I just described, where over time, this isn't something that just happens when mom and dad die, but it's been going on for decades, that the next generation has been acquiring, buying this piece, buying that piece, buying the equipment or the next 40 acres or whatever, so that it's not all of a sudden. There are other things. I've seen families, in fact, this is an interesting one. I just worked with a family in Illinois where the family has become the corporate giant farm operation, and it's an investment. And the family collectively keeps it, and they all recognize we have an investment in this, and this is what we do as a family. We invest in farms, and they are acquiring farms from families who did not plan, by the way, from the families who biffed it, and they face planted, and now somebody else is going to have their farm. Well, this family is out there buying up those farms. And so the ones who work on the farm get paid for working on the farm, but they also share in the common investment revenue that comes from the collective farm. So that's another thing. Keep the farm as an investment and pay the ones who work on it. I like to use, candidly, a dynastic trust, a multi-generational trust, so that the succession is smooth. We can manage tax issues and control issues and who gets what and how do we be fair to the others all the way with that. And often, if mommy and daddy are doing good financial planning, there's going to be other stuff. I had another family where they had property that was next to the city that they were going to sell anyway. So mommy and daddy built a bunch of apartment buildings on that, and it was cash flowing as good as the farm. And the two daughters that, again, married wealthy professionals are living in the city, got the apartment buildings, and Junior, who's been driving a tractor for 40 years and has the suntan to prove it, he's going to get the farm. So there's lots of things like that can be done. And what I find is families don't know that. They haven't thought through that. And having somebody that's been down that road hundreds of times and lots of other people can bring options to say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? So we can float ideas until one of them resonates with the family and they say, I like that one.
Mm-hmm. As you were just talking about cash flowing, that some of these properties where cash flowing is good or better than the ranch or the farm in that case. What happens though if we're dealing with a ranch that may not be profitable?
I actually have a relative in this situation right now. It's a beautiful property. It's an heirloom property. It's been in the family for multiple generations. It is just a gorgeous place. It's a little piece of paradise, and it barely pays for itself. And so the family is confronted with the reality that, wow, does any of the kids who all live in the city, there's no family members working this farm, and mom has passed away and dad has age-related incapacity issues, and who's going to run this thing? And the cold, cruel, ugly reality is, unless you're going to move there, sweetie, you're going to sell it because you can't keep it. And they're looking for desperately, can we lease it out? Can we, sell all of it? Can we keep the homestead so that we can go there and spend our summers in that place? It's so beautiful. And sometimes there are compromises like that they can do. But the reality is that family's probably going to end up selling that farm.
Yeah. Unfortunately. Well, let's take another break here. My guest today is Rick Durfee with the Durfee Law Group. They're out of Mesa, Arizona with their main office. They also have 3 other locations, one in Pocatello, Idaho, and a couple more there in Arizona. Now, when we come back, we're going to get into the subject of land rich, cash poor when it comes to estate planning. Also, the topic of, is just a will good enough? We'll have those answers from Rick when we return here on the Workin' Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by Inherent Select from Zoetis. Unlocking genetic potential starts with the complete picture of your commercial cow herd. You can learn how to get started with Inherent Select at beefgenetics.com/radio. Back after this.
What if your commercial beef herd could be better than you thought possible? Genetic testing can help give you more confidence about what your herd is made of, and more importantly, what it can be. Inherent Select from Zoetis provides data-driven genetic insights to help you make more informed selection, breeding, and culling decisions about your cows and heifers. The journey from genetic potential to reality begins with Inherent Select. Ask a genetics rep how to save on testing with our whole herd promotion. Go to beefgenetics.com/radio.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Rick Durfee with Durfee Law Group. As we are talking on estate planning, we've had some interesting discussion already as we're just some of the family dynamics that come into estate planning. As you see folks calling you up, maybe walking in the doors there, and they say, well, here's what we've got. We've got a last will. Is that good enough? And I know that's probably not good enough. So let's talk about why it's not.
So to me, that's like the farmer saying, hey, I've got a mule. Why do I need a tractor? Come on. That technology was out of date a century ago. And the same with wills. Wills are a guarantee that there will be litigation. There will be conflict. It must go to court. There's no way around it. So it goes to court. It invites conflict. The family members get scary notices that motivate them to go talk to a lawyer. And when all the family members lawyer up, what's the probability of somebody being grumpy and unhappy and there being a family conflict? So wills are better than nothing, because if you don't have a will, then the politicians are going to decide what's going to happen with your farm. So a will is a step up from nothing, but not a very big step. The trust, and candidly, even just a trust, that's like saying, well, I have a Swiss Army knife. Are those all the tools? Is that the only tool I need to run my farm? Well, probably not. You're going to need other stuff. So odds are with your farm, trust will be a part of it, but there will be other things. There will be LLCs and limited partnerships and other devices in addition to the trust. So you need tools to get the job done, and the tools have to be suitable to the particular application.
Okay, now, and maybe this is a question that is for a whole nother show, but can we go through? And I know each ranch is unique in some ways, but generally the same tools are available. Can we generally kind of go through some of these tools and types of trust or tools that are available that we should be looking at?
Sure, we can do a drive-by. The starter is a revocable living trust, is what it's commonly called. This is included in mommy and daddy's taxable estate. They can amend it. They can change it any time. It's going to get taxed when they die. That's a big issue. It's also available to their creditors. Then typically in a multi-generational plan, we're going to have one or more irrevocable trusts. And if I'm involved in it, it will be dynastic. It'll be multi-generational. And that's outside the taxable estate, unavailable to the creditors, and protected both from taxes and from liabilities. And then typically we're going to have a series of partnerships between those. So what that does is it fractionalizes the ownership. So to the extent that the revocable trust owns the partnership, it's going to be included in mommy and daddy's estate and it's theirs. To the extent that the irrevocable dynasty trust owns it, it's out of the taxable estate and does not get taxed and is unavailable to the creditors. So if we use an LLC, a limited liability company, or a limited partnership, and a series of these, we can have a management company, for example, that manages and controls things and gives daddy the control he needs until the day he dies, even if he doesn't own it. And the partnership, we can have this fractionalized ownership. So we're involving next generation, generation 3, generation 4 sometimes, so that we have a plan for how this is going to move forward. The one thing I know is that without a plan, it breaks. With a plan, we have a much better shot of making it work and making it last multi-generationally. So that whole idea of, we're going to have a partnership between each generation so that they have fractional ownership. And that partnership can include the ones who work on the farm. Maybe they get control of the farm, even if they don't own it all. Now, this is one, if you ask generation 2, they're going to say, I hate that. My sister, who was married to the rich dentist, she gets a piece of the income from the farm. Well, yeah, she does. That's her inheritance, dude. But what do you get? Now, because you're working on it, we're going to make it so you get control and you get paid for your work and you get the same share from the profits that your sister gets. So there's things like that we can do. And that's a classic example where the mommy and daddy need to be grown-ups and tell their kids, yeah, look, I get it. You want to be the king of the hill and get it all. But the fact is, it's our farm and we want your sister to have her share. And this is how she's going to get it. And then brother and sister in that scenario can I buy her out? Well, yeah, you can. Make a deal. And we see that all the time where the ones working on the farm will buy out the ones that aren't working on the farm. I'm actually working with a family right now in Idaho. We're working with generation 6 and 7.
Oh, wow.
And I have been working with them through all those generations. But before they got to us, they have successfully passed a business operation through multiple generations, and they've stayed with the ones that are working. And so we are now using modern tools. They kind of did it with, like a blacksmith shop, forging their own iron tools. Well, okay, that was great for its day, but now we have better tools today. So now we're formulating and putting together a plan that's going to take for the next 7 generations. So I think that you don't get to that again without a plan. So there's tools and having people who know how to use the tools, find out people that have done it and succeeded at it, and then find out what they did. And you'll be able to bring that kind of succession plan into your family.
And folks, I just want to reemphasize here, as Rick started the answer of this question, he said, sure, we'll do a drive-by. And that was, and because it really, when you talk about some of these tools, each of these tools, Rick, are kind of their own show in itself, aren't they?
Yes. We could spend a whole show talking about all of these tools,
Yes.
the LLC or the limited partnership, and the variations and what, the nuances and what works and what doesn't work.
Now, one phrase that I pulled out of there, and you kept referring to this, and I think you sort of alluded to that. How do we plan through this in a multi-generational mindset? And the terminology was dynastic estate planning. That was kind of what you were sort of answering through some of these multiple use of tools that we could use in our estate planning, so that we could be a ranch that's 7 generations down the road in our planning.
Yes, and this ties to the land-rich, cash-poor issue. Often, one of the things that clobbers the multi-generational ranch is we have so much land, and it is so valuable that when mommy and daddy died, there is a big monster tax. And how do we pay for that? Oh, well, we're going to carve off this piece over here, and we're going to sell it at buy or sell prices because we have 9 months to raise the money. Mm-hmm. And there's some special rules for farming issues that can extend that out a little bit if it's done properly. But bottom line is they're selling stuff off to pay the taxes. And if we have structured that land-rich asset so that it's already owned partly outside the taxable estate, we can mitigate the estate tax. We can have to zero. And particularly, let me say it this way, the sooner we start, the better. If we're waiting until, mom and dad are in their late 80s and we don't know how, they've only got a few more clicks left, boy, that's desperation time. But if mom and dad are in their 40s or 50s and we got a few decades here, we can structure that so it's going to be very, very tax efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, let's take another break here. We've got one more segment with Rick as we'll wrap up our conversation here today. Some very enlightening, I guess, for myself, some concepts here to be thinking about. And I think it also puts you down the road of beginning to think about this. As Rick said, it's never too early to start. And one of the worst things you can do is wait till it's too late to start some of these conversations. We're going to continue with Rick when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Rick Durfee with Durfee Law Group. The home office is out of Mesa, Arizona. Rick, we've really been able to focus what I think is, when it comes to estate planning, as its issue itself, but one of the things inside of that is the family dynamics and just getting off the mark. You've really been able to focus on that here today, because I really think that's one of the big elements, the big things that we all deal with as ranching families. To put some urgency in this, though, there is a sunset happening with our estate taxing. Talk about that, because 2025, the end of 12/31/25, this is going to revert back to a lower amount. So there might be some haste in some of our planning as well.
Right. Currently, right now, the exclusion from estate taxes, and this is a federal exclusion. There may also be state taxes, depending on where you live and where your farm is. But on a federal level, the exclusion is currently $13 million and change per person, which means as a married couple, there's 26 million-ish that we can pass to the next generation without triggering a tax. That number is dropping roughly in half. We don't know exactly what it's going to be because it's indexed to inflation, and inflation's not done yet. So we're going to see, as you mentioned, on the last day of 2025, that exclusion drops to the actual number. It's $5 million indexed to inflation. So whatever that number is. Yeah. And people are saying, it's going to be $6 or $7 or $8 million. And I just don't know. So for the farm family that is looking at their land rich, we have, $10 million, $20 million in land, even though we're still working 60-hour weeks and we feel like we're barely making it. What do we do with that? And that's a classic example. I think it would be helpful if I kind of walked through that.
Okay.
So, for example, we can put that land in either an LLC or a limited partnership. And by the way, there's some state-specific things here. This doesn't work everywhere. There are some states where we have to do other things, and being knowledgeable about that is kind of helpful.
Yeah.
So, but in general, we can put that land in, let's just call it a limited partnership. And we can grandfather in the $13 million exclusion before it expires. And we can do that by setting up one of these dynastic irrevocable trusts for the benefit of the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, and make a gift using that lifetime exclusion of non-controlling limited partnership interest. So we can get $12, $13 million out, $26 million out of the taxable estate right now. Bang, out, tax-free. And then if inflation continues to happen, the value of the farm property continues to go up. Now your ranch or farm property is out of the taxable state. We can structure that so that mommy and daddy keep control and continue to have access to income for their lifetime. So they're not surrendering control to their children. They're not making themselves, oh, I have to go ask my children for money. No, we're not in that scenario. You're in control. You get to still call the shots. You're making all those operational decisions and all the income decisions, but the equity is outside your taxable estate. And that's done with a series, a cluster of some of those entities that we kind of drove past and looked at quickly. Mm-hmm. A couple of trusts, a couple of entities, a limited partnership. Often we'll have an entity, a management company that manages things, and we can put equipment in an LLC. We can put different properties in different LLCs, and all those can be owned under a limited partnership. And by the way, this kind of structure creates some present income tax planning options and makes available some features of the tax law that are otherwise not available, so you can use the tax law to your advantage and actually help on the present income tax obligations in addition to avoiding or mitigating the long-term estate tax. Mm-hmm. And we have 18 months here. Is that what, the rest of this year and all of next year to get that done? And so what I'm going to tell you, don't do this, because I know this happens all the time, because I've been through this cycle many times. I want to just point out the estate tax issue, by the way, is highly political. The politicians it punted back and forth across the field, depending on which side they're on. And it's curiously not clear-cut this party or that party, because there are rich farmers in both parties. There are poor farmers in both parties. So it's kind of convoluted in which segment of the politicians is going to support or not support that. But what I don't want you to do is wait until December 5th of 2025 and call somebody like me or somebody like me and say, hey, can we get this done before the end of the year? Oh my goodness. Yeah. This is going to be my answer. If you do that to me, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to charge you many, many times more than I would charge everybody else, because I'm going to be forced to make my staff work overtime through the holidays to get that done. Mm-hmm. So don't wait till then. Do it now. That's if we could have a call to action on this show, it's procrastination is your enemy. It is going to hurt you. It's going to cost you money, real money, and it's going to hurt your family. So take action now. The politicians are at play. The rules are changing, and the best course of action is for us to take action based on the rules as they are now. Mm-hmm.
Well, Rick, as we start to tail out of this, I still have a couple more questions. This one next, because I cannot be the only guy that thinks about this, and everything we talked about here today, I'd say, okay, yep, I'm good. I know how important this is. I know there's folks listening say, yes, I know how important this is. But my word, what is this going to cost me? And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, you can't afford not to. And I understand that. I understand that's the response back. But let's talk some element of the cost of this, because that's really, everybody's going to say, okay, I agree, but I don't know if I can afford to do it.
And that's a fair question. And it's a valid thing to consider. As you look forward to whatever agricultural product you're producing, can we afford to start it? Can we afford to maintain it throughout the year? And is it going to work? It's going to pay off at the end. So generally speaking, a farm family, for the very basics, for the elemental things, are going to spend probably $5,000 to $8,000 on an entry level in today's market. If they're doing fancy stuff like I just described with multiple entities and lifetime gifts, it's probably realistic they're going to spend anywhere from 30 to 70 or 80 grand, depending on how complicated it is. I've had plans where, for example, there's multiple pieces of real estate and it's convoluted and it's patchwork and the owners really don't even know what they have. And until we go dig into the title and figure it out and tell them, oh, you own this and you don't own that. Oh, I thought I did. That was right. No, you don't own that. That's not yours. But this piece is, oh, I didn't know it was mine. So I've actually had those kind of conversations with people. So figuring out what that really is and dealing with the complexity drives up the cost. Family issues drive up the cost. Well, my son doesn't agree. He doesn't like this. Well, why did you ask his opinion? But addressing those things can drive up the cost. There are things that are not legal fees. So, for example, you're probably going to have to pay for a valuation, an appraisal of both the real estate and any business entity. And that can cost as much as the lawyers. And the reality is there's going to be accounting and tax reporting costs. So there's three costs. There's the setup cost that you pay the lawyer. There's the maintenance cost, and that's usually you pay whoever's doing your taxes, your CPA or your tax attorney, whoever's doing the taxes. And the third cost is the complexity cost, because we're going to go from, well, I just own it all to, there's a trust. Oh, wait, there's two trusts. Oh, wait, there's an LLC and a limited partnership and a bunch of LLCs. And that's complicated. So to help with that complexity, we like to diagram it out, but still complexity is a real cost. Mm-hmm. And I've had people say, especially in simple places, simple situations where there are no kids, I'm going to give it all to somebody else. Anyway, well, let's keep it simple. Avoid the complexity, because if you're going to give it to charity or something like that anyway, or sell it off and go spend the proceeds in a hammock on a beach somewhere where it's sunny and warm, great. We can keep it simple, but I hope I've given you kind of a range there.
Yeah. Well, Rick, first of all, I just want to say thank you for answering that question, because I think, when you talk about some of those numbers as we talked about earlier, some ranches that maybe aren't very profitable, that's a big number. That's a big number for them. But I will revert back to the thing that I said, and that is we can't afford not to either.
Oh, yeah. So, I'm just going to say, I have I have an acre plus. So I have a big lawn. And when I first moved onto this property and my sons were mowing the lawn, they were using a push lawnmower. It was 22 inches wide, and it would take them a day and a half to mow the stinking lawn. And so when they said, Dad, we need a riding lawnmower. I said, yeah, but it's thousands of dollars. And they go, yeah, well, you're going to kill us. So it was worth it. When we bought the lawnmower, yes, it was a pain in the neck, but now 3 or 4 hours and we're done instead of 3 or 4 days. So yeah, I get it. And it's a real expense, but especially really, you want this farm to continue in your family? You want it to be something that goes on? Do you prefer the politician's plan where they come and take it from you when you're dead? Do you prefer having your children fight about it and litigate it? Because that's an option too. So to avoid the pain points that you don't want, you're going to have to pay for some solutions.
Mm-hmm. Final question here, Rick, and I noticed this in our email correspondence back and forth at the very bottom of your signature of Durfee Law Group. It says, live well, leave a legacy. I highlighted that. I appreciate you. That's kind of important in context of where we're at and what we're trying to get across here today.
Well, that's my trademark tagline. Our goal, what we want to do, what we try to help people do is, live life and have a great life. But recognize that what you do with what you have is going to have an impact for better or for worse on the generations that come after you. And if you are deliberate and intentional, it will be a blessing to them instead of a curse. We can avoid the wealth destruction cycle where mommy and daddy are rich and their kids enjoy the money and their grandkids are broke again and have to start over. We can disrupt that cycle. We can cause the wealth in the farm to truly be multi-generational and go on and persist. But again, that only happens on purpose. It never happens by accident.
Well, that's a good phrase there as we end our conversation. Rick, I thank you for a lot of the things you talked about, because it does touch on issues that I think for all of us that are in ranching families that have went through or going to be going through estate issues, probably thoughts we've all had. So thank you today for joining us.
Thank you for letting me be here. I really had fun. This was a great time to be with you.
You bet. And again, my guest was Rick Durfee with Durfee Law Group, joining us today with a take a bit different than what we've had before. Really, when it gets into estate planning, I think we really did touch on some of the concerns or things that can happen when we don't have the family dynamic elements figured out when it comes to good estate planning, and really using that estate planning to handle some of the family dynamics more than anything, as he talked about a lot of the different tools that are available, and we just touched on those briefly. Now, should you have more questions for Rick, please feel free to reach out to them. Now, their website is DurfeeLawGroup.com. Durfee is spelled with 2 E's, so it's DurfeeLawGroup.com. You can find contact information there. Also, they have a learning center in there as well, with a lot of different topics and information on some of the different estate topics that you might have questions on as well. So check their website at DurfeeLawGroup.com. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day will be in with a look at our long-term weather. And when we come right back, we'll hear from the Captain Tim O'Byrne in this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. Back after this.
Looking for the perfect gift for a gardener or weather enthusiast? Introducing the Tropo, a precision rain gauge that has revolutionized both reliability and convenience. Expertly engineered by meteorologists, the Tropo gauge boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. It's just about summertime. And I'm excited about the summer issue of Working Ranch magazine. It should be in your mailbox here in a couple of weeks. A lot of good articles in there. One of them is on the National Ranching Heritage Center, a story by Sue Hancock Jones. This is an amazing place, folks. I've been there. It's a 27-acre facility right there in Lubbock on the Texas Tech grounds. And it's an amazing, well-preserved learning center that teaches folks all about ranching in the Southwest. And it's got a lot of great old buildings that they brought on the property and refurbished. And there's learning centers and all kinds of stuff for the kids. And they have events there. So check it out. And when you're in Lubbock, stop in and see it. It's easy to get to right in the middle of town there. And Justin and folks out there, you know, we all try to get our little space of sanity wherever we can. And, of course, folks like us, we like to be outside as much as we can. So what I like to do in the evenings is sit outside and watch the birds and the sun go down and listen to my very favorite radio station on the FM dial. I can get it on just online. Delta Country 105.7 out of Indianola, Mississippi. I got to tell you, folks, if you want a taste of old town America, that is the radio station to listen to. They play nothing but the good old country hits. You know, there's a couple of Saturday and Sunday evening programs by different DJs that just highlight some of the songs and some of the feelings that we used to feel when we were kids growing up with 8 tracks and little transistor radios and listening to the Grand Ole Opry and all that kind of stuff. That's where I go. That's my happy place. Delta Radio 105.7. Back to you, Justin.
All right, thanks, Captain. And the only thing I was wondering, how in the world did you find a station out of Mississippi? I guess that would be the question. I'd have a little bit about that. But thanks for the update there. And also, looking forward to the next issue, the summer edition of Working Ranch Magazine coming out. As the Captain said, be looking for that in your mailbox. And if you don't have a subscription, it's pretty easy to get it started. You can go to workingranchmag.com and you can get a subscription started today. Well, joining us now with a look at our long-term weather is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, we were joking just a little bit before we went on air here how I'm like, well, what do we want to talk about? Because it's just kind of been the same sort of weather pattern that we've been in, just more of that spring type weather. We haven't yet got into the summer look with everything, but that's kind of what you're seeing as you look out 7 to 10 days out.
Yeah, for a large part of the country, it's still going to be spring. Now, in parts of the southern United States, especially the east, the southeast, and then the desert southwest, you know, they're into their beginnings of their summer pattern. But when you look at the rest of the nation, from the Corn Belt and the Great Lakes through the northern plains, the Rockies, into the Pacific Northwest, there's still lots of ups and downs and spring weather conditions coming to where we, at the same time we talk about that, we don't see like a late season hard frost or freeze anywhere. We don't see a late season big snowstorm hitting any areas, but we do see it a little bit of a roller coaster with temperatures and conditions. Now, ultimately, I think as we get right around the first week of June, we'll start to see that transition, but it may start a little later this year. And a lot of times we'll start to see that summer pattern with the jet stream in by this weekend coming up, the Memorial Day weekend, but not this year. Things are still going to be active up and down in the north, in the central, and the west.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we were talking here today, you're on the road, and you have, of course, you're out of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and you were driving up north, and you just in your drive there of about a 4 or 5 hour drive there, you saw everything from that I-70 corridor that you said is showing very dry conditions to moving further north. And seeing more moisture has happened in the northern versus that I-70 corridor being a dry spot.
Yeah, what's been really interesting this spring and making the connection to the dying El Nino and the developing La Nina is that the jet stream pattern, which for the fall and winter favored the I-80, I-70 corridor areas with the better precipitation and leaving the northern areas dry, we've reversed that. Mm-hmm. We started to see the storm track over the last 8 weeks take more of a northerly route. And what that's done is that's brought some significant moisture to parts of the northern Rockies, the northern plains. The Corn Belt has been real wet. And those areas you mentioned along I-70, I-40, sections, parts of the Interstate 80 corridor just have been a lot drier. So what we started with at the beginning of the cold season has done a 180. And that's something that we're going to keep an eye on for the remaining weeks of spring and into early summer to see if that continues to where the central and northern U.S. are looking at the best chances of at or above average precipitation. And those areas that have started the trend drier here, we may see that continue into June.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not real great for some of those because those are similar areas that were dry even last year when you look into Kansas and down into Arizona, New Mexico.
Yes, I am concerned about those areas, especially since we are expecting a weaker than average monsoon thunderstorm season coming up out of Mexico into Arizona and New Mexico. It looks like it's going to be off to a late start this year, and that ultimately will affect things as we go into the middle to the end of June and into July.
All right. Well, Don, appreciate you joining us here. I know you're on the road here today. Safe travel on your way home, and we'll talk to you next week.
Okay.
And you can find meteorologist Don Day each and every morning on his daily video podcast, or if you're looking at some weather stations or weather instruments, things like that, you can also check it out by going to his website at dayweather.com. Stay with us. We'll be back after this.
What if your commercial beef herd could be better than you thought possible? Genetic testing can help give you more confidence about what your herd is made of, and more importantly, what it can be. Inherit Select from Zoetis provides data-driven genetic insights to help you make more informed selection, breeding, and culling decisions about your cows and heifers. The journey from genetic potential to reality begins with Inherit Select. Ask a genetics rep how to save on testing with our whole herd promotion. Go to beefgenetics.com/radio.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Hey, thanks for joining us on our program here today. By the way, if you like what you heard or you are listening to a show and you like it, leave some comments. Leave a rating. That's helpful for us as well. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. To get a hold of me, you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.